All right. Good evening once again, everybody. My name is Natalie, and I'm here with the City Island Nautical Museum this evening. And we just want to thank you again for taking the time to be here with us for this presentation of Boatyards Past and Present. Just to remind you all, this event is being recorded so we can put it on our social media accounts. Any questions that you may have, please feel free to add it to the chat, and we will take some time to answer them at the ending of this event. Okay. All right.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to pass this on to Lauren Nye, our secretary.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Does this sound good? Let's see. All right. So I'm Lauren Nye. I am the City Island Nautical Museum secretary, a fourth generation City Islander, a competitive sailboat racer, and a nonprofit professional. I am so a sixth generation City Islander. First number of the night. I am so excited to be here tonight at the museum, joined by our panelists and our special guests in the audience. We hope to have even more audience members with us next time as the museum begins to open up and offer hybrid educational talks. Tonight, I'm joined by my dad, Tom Nye, the City Island Nautical Museum president and curator and historian, Jason Barron, owner of Barron Boatyard, as well as owner of Raven, a competitive J105 on Long Island Sound, and Alex Giaccon, manager of Consolidated Yacht Yards and boat and car restoration extraordinaire. Welcome, and thank you guys for being here tonight.
Thank you.
I've been really wanting to bring you all together from some time, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity tonight. As many of you listening know, City Island was once filled with a variety of boatyards since the mid-19th century. City Island's boatyards have played a vital role in the local economy and produced some of the fastest and most impressive yachts in the world. Today, we still have yards, including Barron's Boatyards doing repair work for leading race boats on the East Coast and Consolidated Yacht Yards restoring large cruising boats. We're going to begin tonight with a brief 15-minute overview of the history of City Island's boatyards, narrated by my dad, followed by a timeline history presentation. And then we'll hear from Jason and Alex on their current roles and work at the one of the two, or some of the few remaining boatyards on City Island. And then we'll have time at the end for some questions. Without further ado, I'll hand it off to my dad with some background on the boatyards of City Island.
All right. What you see on the screen now is a timeline of the first shipyards and as it went through time. Prior to David Carl, the first marine slipway was built on East Pilot Street by the Horton family. And one of the first persons to use the slipway was Sam Hart, who was a shipbuilder from Northport. He owned a shipyard out there, but he was in litigation with the town of Huntington over the lease on the yard, and he found time on his hands. So he found that City Island was a good place to come and keep busy. And he had a small repair business on the slipway. Soon after that, by the late 1850s, David Carl came, and of course, Sam Hart and David Carl were neighbors out in Northport. And he actually built a small sloop, Bell, in 1859 on the slipway. And when Sam Hart had the litigation on his shipyard in Huntington all resolved, he went back, and David Carl stayed and expanded the yard, bought property, and established the first commercial shipyard on City Island. In Northport, he had a shipyard with his brother Jesse, at which point in 1865 they dissolved their partnership. David stayed here. Jesse continued that yard out in Northport till 1910. But you can see here that there were a number of shipyards here. All of them complemented each other. None of them really, there was competition, of course, but the fact that City Island had marine railways, the yacht builders or the yachtmen of Westchester, Northern Long Island, and New York had a place to haul their boats, and the commercial schooners that would come by had a place to have the ships repaired and or built. Gustav Hillman, who was came shortly after David Carl, was a noted naval architect that designed some of the prominent steam yachts of the late 1800s. A.B. Wood and B.F. Wood, his son, were boat builders, but they were expert boat builders. They built a lot of the pilot boats and oyster skiffs, but they also specialized in self-righting lifeboats that they sold to the US government, the life-saving service, and municipalities all over the country. They were followed by the Biles brothers, whose father was a shipwright also, and in fact, the builder of the schooner yacht America. But they came from Brooklyn in the 1860s and worked for other yards before establishing their own concerns. They weren't on the same scale as the Carl, Hillman, Hawkins, or the Wood Yard, but they built some prominent boats, whether it was a small rowboat or a 55-foot ketch or yawl. They were excellent builders. And that's the key to the yacht builders on City Island, is that they all were expert in their craft, and they were side by side. Whereas in a lot of other places, you'll find excellent shipyards in that, but not so many, like an all-star team as there were on City Island, complemented by the first-class sail makers and channel rigs that were also here. This follow along on the timeline, we have Archibald Robertson, who built some of the largest yachts and ships on the island. Henry Peepgrass, who came up from Brooklyn, but he was an innovator. He perfected the pouring of lead keels, the building of wooden masts, hollow wooden masts, and using teak in the yacht construction. Consolidated Shipbuilding was started in 1887. They came up to the island in 1946, buying the Robert Jacobs shipyard right after World War II. Adam Hansen had several yards around New York Harbor before coming to City Island in 1902. He bought land from the City Island Athletic Association, right where the Nevins yard would eventually be. And he was there for a couple of years before going back to Sweden, at which point he stayed in Sweden for about 2 years and then came back and established another yard down in Brooklyn again. He lasted until about 1922. Ratsey and Lapthorne came to the island in 1902 after being enticed by the likes of Morgan, Belmont, and the like, with promises of work, of which they initially got. Ratsey and Lapthorne built sails, working sails for Morgan's Corsair. And they also, during their time at City Island, were involved in every America's Cup campaign, doing the lion's share of the sales. City Island Shipbuilding was a small concern that was leased property in the Archibald Robertson shipyard. Reginald Fans Purdy and Charles Collison were foremen at the Townsend Downey yard in Staten Island during the building of the Atlantic, the Shenandoah, and the Meteor before coming to City Island. So they were well versed in shipbuilding. They only lasted a couple of years before they went out of business, though, and Reginald Fans Purdy stayed on to join with Thomas Arthur Kyle in the Kyle and Purdy shipyard. And during the teens, they built some of the biggest yachts and ships on City Island. The biggest ship that was built here, City Island never had anything over 200 foot built, but the Atlantic City, which was a cargo passenger vessel that ran between New York, Atlantic City, and Philadelphia, was 178 feet. and I think 950 tons displacement. So it could be the largest vessel that was ever built on the island. But actually, Archibald Robertson started that ship for the New York City Corrections Department. But in a change of administrations, they canceled the contract, and the ship sat in storage at the yard until Kyle and Purdy took it over, and they found a buyer for it, and they finished it off as the Atlantic City. In 1926, that was about a year as Miniford was established, and Kretzer moved from the Harlem River up to City Island. Bill Kretzer had worked with Henry Nevins at Consolidated down in Morris Heights. And so they both apprenticed together, and both yards were known to be par excellence in all their work. United Boat Service was the evolution of Bob Jenkins' yard, which was right by Anderson's Dock at the end of Carroll Street. Sidney Davis had operated in Far Rockaway, and he built some excellent boats from all designers. And he was a pretty creative guy too. I heard a lot of stories about how he handled customers with different models that he built. One fella coming in to see how his boat was done, and the boat that he was looking at was actually somebody else's. But when he came in, Sidney Davis had it painted the color that he wanted, so he would think it was his. But in the end, they all got their boats on time and all just as it was. But Sidney Davis came here, and he operated both at the end of Ditmar Street on the creek, and also over in Triborough, City Island Yacht Basin at the end of Marine Street. At one time, though, he actually worked out of or during that time, during the war, he worked out of a building right here on Fordham Street, building the mast for the YMS minesweepers. Barron's Boatyard came in right after that, around the wartime, mid-40s. Although they had properties, so a lot, you'll find that a lot of the yards, it was a growing thing. It wasn't something that just happened, overnight. It happened more by plan. Bridge Boatyard came in at that, and they were dealers. And then Consolidated Yacht Yard, Consolidated Shipbuilding bought the Robert Jacobs shipyard right after World War II. And they built yachts right up until the early 50s. Then they got contracts from NATO to build minesweepers. And the last ship that they built was the Bittern, 144-foot mine hunter. And that was completed in 57, 58 over that time when it was commissioned. And at that point, Consolidated folded and sold the property in the yard to the Rodstrom Brothers Syndicate, and it became Rodstrom Shipyard for about 3 years until Wes Rodstrom, who was the head, figured it would be better to keep it at Consolidated for business reasons and legal reasons. So by 1962, it came back to the short name of Consolidated Yachts. This is the Levinas Hall, which was and still stands on East Carroll Street, just in from the corner. It's now a two-family home, but at one time it was a hall for a lot of events on City Island, and David Carl used it to loft out big schooners in there. It was a big open space, and some of these schooners you can see on the page here. By the way, on our Facebook page, there's albums with pictures of every shipyard and yacht yard sailmaker, so you can see all this and follow the history in more detail on that. But the lineage of that yard went from David Carl to Henry P. Press to Robert Jacob to Consolidated. to consolidated yachts. Wooden McClure was an evolution of the A.B. Wood and B.F. Wood yard. McClure was the son of a sailor that regularly made trips on some of the coasting schooners down to City Island. Married into the family, was a good yacht and shipbuilder, and worked very well with B.F. Wood's son, B.F. Wood Jr. And they lasted through the late 1910s, at which time they bought property, the old home shipbuilding at Sea Sled up in Mystic, Connecticut, where they relocated. B.F. Wood Sr. staying at City Island. And after they tried their adventure up at Mystic, everything reverted back to City Island through the 30s. And then by 1930, after the Depression set in, that yard folded up and actually was going to be an airline facility where they actually made big wooden airlines. Never happened. Stayed a yacht yard. It still is a yacht yard. This is how the yard looked in 1922. You can see one of the 110-foot minesweepers on the ways. And that's looking down Marine Street, which used to be called Franklin Avenue, and drawing from their brochure. And this is just to show that some of the wooden McClure boats are still in existence, this being a P-class yacht sailing up off of Maine, still in pristine shape. There's a few of them. Olympian, Virginia Cube class is out in Dana Point, California, still in great shape. So some of these yachts are still doing very well. That's the Hawkins yard. Gustav Hillman, John P. Hawkins, who took over the yard in the mid to late 1870s. And then Lem Miller after Hawkins died in 1909. And this is the Hawkins house and yard building. And in fact, this building was only torn down less than 10 years ago on Fordham Street. And that's the yard in the late 1890s with some of the prominent yachts. Lem Miller was a America's Cup skipper and mate with Charles Barr on several America's Cup campaigns, including Columbia and Reliance. William Biles had a small shop on the creek at the end of Ditmar Street. And I guess at high tide, the boats could be floated in and worked on and or launched if they were being built. But he did a lot of repair work and a lot of small craft. He was known for building quality shells like this, racing shells, and oyster skiffs, I guess, too, because just in this picture, you can see the creek and that building that burned down in the early 70s. But at the bottom of the picture and out of view was a beach where the oystermen were frequent to bring their skiffs and boats in to have repaired. And right offshore, they'd have them moored and have the oyster barges where oysters were stored before the market sloops and schooners would pick them up and bring them downtown. His brother, George W. Biles, was at the end of between Center and Winter Street on the east side. And the yard, after it went out of business in 1909, actually, when he retired, he sold the yard to Nevins, who expanded his yard. But they built some really nice boats also. That's it. And you can see the building right in the middle is still standing on City Island Avenue. That's the Henry Pavecross yard in the 1890s. He did a lot of work. There was a time when he was in court with Elizabeth Delancey regarding riparian rights on the waterfront that he had no idea about when he bought the yard. But during that time, he built the 3-story building and a lot of shops on the, he invested a lot in the yard during this time, which paid off in the long run. Had some drawings from newspapers of the time showing the yard. There's the Robertson yard looking over towards the Hawkins yard, just down from us here at Fordham Street. Robert Jacob took over the Carl and Pete Burris yard in 1900, had it in 1945. This is one of the iconic photos taken July of '43 of YMS minesweepers, 77-foot Vospers, and 65-foot tugboats being built in the yard. What you can't see in that picture, if you had a loop or a magnifying or if it blown up, you could see all the different parts that they would take, you know, for each boat, because they built quite a few of them, over 20. In fact, one of these tugs, the last tug that they built, LT 602, is still in service in the US Navy up at the Portsmouth Navy Yard in New Hampshire. The only one still active. Adam Hansen, you know, where Nevins is, right by Biles, from 1902 1907 when Nevins bought it. That's Nevins, who became the premier yacht builder in the country and maybe the world. Inside the Nevins shop. Another iconic photo of him taking the mast for Vanity, May of 1928. This mast, 168 feet, probably cost as much as many yachts would, and it's all spliced spruce glued together. That's the yard, July of '33, with the new elevator dock and track system, number of 8 meters in the yard, and I think that's Nina, the schooner that was in for service also. She had quite a bit of service back then. But if you look offshore, you can see the number of boats that were normally at anchor at the time. That dock was built with the aid of Owen Stevens Sr., who had sold his coal business and helped subsidize it. He was paid for by Nevins, but a walk through the yard, a snowy mid-January day in '35. And that's how the yard looked and how many of us remember it in the '70s before it was leveled for the school. Kyle and Purdy with Miramar, one of the large yachts that they built. These yachts with the large windows on the side were not really made for ocean going, but more for coastal cruising, for comfort and so forth. This boat found hard times in that the owner, shortly after launching the boat, he died of a heart attack on it while the boat was being refurbished. Not refurbished, but having furniture put on. And later on, with a different owner, it was lost in the Bermuda Triangle. This is the Sea Hornet built at the Kyle and Purdy Yard. And she was a torpedo boat, experimental torpedo boat that was built at the latter part of World War I. Never got to be used, but later became a rum runner. And because of the heavy armament, withstood quite a few rounds, at which time, when it was finally caught, it became a chaser of rum runners. Later on, T.A. Kyle reorganized the yard and under the T.A. Kyle and Company Yacht Builders after 22. And this is Henry Devereaux's boat, Netamo, being built in the late 30s. Of course, the Medford Yacht Yard, which was started in 1926 on the land between Nevins and Jacobs. Still active, but not the same yard. This is the Medford Yard in the early 60s, or late 60s rather, with the America, the A&E Eagle, and the Maid Marian. It's probably Curlew behind America, as she was normally there. Maid Marian, that was her regular spot. A&E Eagle wasn't always there, but when she came, she got that spot. And America could basically take any spot. Kretz's. Kretz's has always been known as the yard to have your boat commissioned. They did impeccable work. They were always known to do really nice work, and it was one of those yards that you never really got a chance to walk through, in those days. It was fenced in, but it was always immaculate. It was always like somebody's yard. You never saw a speck on the ground, and the customers appreciated that. And it was almost like a yacht club. But their work on the boats was just as well, and they had a lot of loyal customers. That's how the yard looked. The building on the left is still in there now. On the right was the main building for Kretzer Boatyard that burned down in the late 1990s. And that whole area is where Seafood City is now. United Boat Service was Jenkins' yard, and then when he bought the Anderson's dock at the beginning of World War II, they joined forces, and United Boat Service was born from that. And as such, they got contracts to build landing craft, tugboats, and many different applications of steel. They built steel infirmaries, morgues, and kitchens for the waterfront. This is them moving the same mast that you saw before down to Robert Jacobs to step on the Vanity, and they're moving it up Winter Street. You see Victor Anderson's house. He owned Anderson's dock. Later on, he built the floats for World's Fair Marina and ran that for a while too, before going down to Florida and starting the Miami Marina. ACF Cruises had a station here, and they had quite a big shed of which they stored and serviced all their yachts as well as others. This, while it was no longer ACF, burned down in the early 60s or mid 60s, and it was one of the biggest fires that I remember on City Island. Sidney Davis, as I said, came from Far Rockaway, and he established the yard on, this is actually facing north, which is one of the only places on the island where you can do this, short of North End, where it stretches out at Ditmar Street. You see the mouth of the creek at the top right, but the boat that you see in the picture center is a wood built by Wood and McClure, a Larchmont boat, which was 60 feet long. So they had capabilities of hauling out there. And I remember as a kid at the Harlem Yacht Club seeing the railway still there. Now we're up to Barron's and Consolidated on the island. So I'll hand it over to Jason Barron, who owns Barron's Boatyard.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you for the introduction. As Tommy had pointed out, a lot of the boatyards didn't happen overnight. So my great-grandmother came from Ireland in the 30s or late 20s, and she worked for a casino in this area called Casino Beach, as Tommy had pointed out to me earlier. And from what I understand, they owed her some pay, and as they went bankrupt, the only way that they could pay her back was to give her the title to this small plot of land. That photo behind us, you could see the rail. Was that a railway?
Yeah.
Then you can see what actually is a barge. It says J. Barron, which is my grandfather. And then behind that is a house that's still present today, and that would be our driveway entering the property. My grandfather served 2 different wars, I believe, and when he got back, actually both of my grandfathers were involved in this, pushing that barge up onto land at a really high tide, and then they began to fill in all around it. The next step, I suppose I was 34. The next step was in the 40s, was building a long pier that stretched out from that barge. And from there, they just started to, was it the Hill simultaneously building both properties?
Well, Evers F was, or F strip, Evers Seaplane Base was there, and they moved over to Country Club, at which point Herbie bought the property.
So Herbie and my grandfather, I believe, were, I don't know if they're doing it together, but it was happening at the same time. Phil from New York City, Phil from New York City was, as tunnels were being built and subways, was finding its way here. And yeah, they started the process of building what I believe we have about 2.3 acres. So yeah, it's a great.
Is that the same building that was torn down a few years?
It fell. It was yeah. It lasted a long time, but it was falling apart. But that is the same. Building. You can see the 2 doors there. Those were sliding doors. And eventually, that area right by the J. Barron was, the roof was just totally caved in. So we have to condemn it.
And can you tell us a little bit about like the boats that the yard was originally servicing and then what you're currently doing now? Like I see even it looks like 2 race boats.
Yeah, Natalie, do you mind going back to that other photo? The older one? So I don't know that that's a great photo to depict what I'm about to share with you folks, but originally my grandfather, I believe, started renting rowboats to local fishermen or fishermen from off the island. I actually have a brand that says J. Barron on it, so he would brand each back, the stern of each boat to keep track of them.
I think the flukes similar too.
Yeah, similar to some of the rowboats you guys might see out in the water. They were white and orange and gray. From there, as the property was developed, we, I think, started with a crane, but we began hauling out mostly wooden sailboats and wooden fishing boats of various sizes. But I would believe in like the maybe max was probably 32 to 35 foot long. And then fiberglass came along as my dad started to phase in. He was working for my granddad for quite a bit. And I'd say by the time my dad took over, fiberglass was sort of the new thing. There were still plenty of wooden sailboats, but fiberglass was the future. And today, Natalie just changed the photos is perfect. So today, really what I'm trying to, I guess my niche is race sailboats. Is really, we still do a variety of, we have power boats as well, fishing boats, but I'm really trying to hone in on the racing community. So in this picture on the right, those are 2 Melgis 24s, and small things like working on the bottoms to make them, you know, as fast as possible. It's what I hope people
Yeah,
search me out for.
yeah. And Alex, you're currently managing a yard on the oldest site for shipbuilding, the David Carl Shipyard. But it's not named that anymore. Can you tell a little bit about how you got into this business and the current yard you're managing?
The current yard is owned, well, it was owned by Wes Rodstrom. He had just sold it to another company, and I was actually renting space to keep a few antique BMWs that I used to tinker with. And Wes actually had a Volkswagen van that I was eyeballing, and I was really, really into it. And he was so difficult to deal with that he wouldn't sell me the vehicle. It just wouldn't happen, and I just kept harassing him, kept harassing me. And finally he was like, well, if you want it, like, you gotta come work and just work for me in the yard. So I said, all right, well, I calculated how much for the price and how much work it would be. And I was quite comfortable doing rigging work, mechanical work, operating machinery, and pretty much anything, because I had started working at Barron's Boatyard for Jason's father. Probably 20 years ago, I don't know, almost. I was young, I was actually 11 years old when I started for Jason, or John rather.
Yeah.
So I actually never left. I worked, it was a month of work for the Volkswagen van, and I've been there for about 4 years since, and have assumed the role of the general manager, I suppose. And it's a huge undertaking. The facilities are a little run down, but I'm just trying to keep the beast alive and be part of the legacy of Consolidated Yachts. That's where I'm at right now.
Do you guys have any stories to share on what it's like, work like on a day-to-day, what's an average day at Barron's? What are you guys doing?
Well, I mean, I love working outside. I think it's probably one of the best, attributes of the yard. You can see here, I mean, that's a perfect example. There is no day that's sort of like the day before. Some days we're hauling monster boats and stress levels through the roof. And other days I'll sneak out and maybe go for a short sail with some buddies. But yeah, no, it's a great, you're outside all day long. Most folks are really pleasant to work with. There are days where everything, Murphy's Law and things break on us, especially, Alex can attest, certainly this time of year, machines have sat, as much as we start them up, they've sat unused all winter long, spring comes, everything is going a million miles an hour, and, hydraulic lines break, and I think we ran into each other the other day, crossing paths on my way to the hydraulic storage. So.
Of note, one of the main reasons that the yards at City Island are so integral is that you don't have to go up any creek or into any harbor. It's right in the sound. It's very quick to get to. And in staying in both yards for any amount of time, you see that they'll get rush work where a boat tried to go between Kings Point and Stepping Stone rather than going the other way around and hit the rocks, or catch a heavy duty plastic bag in the prop and plastic netting, construction netting, or what have you. So there are a lot of the reasons that the yards were first established are still with them today.
We're also sort of a key location for transits, going up north.
Oh, sure.
Heading down
It's
south.
a crossroads.
As soon as they enter Long Island Sound, we're sort of like the last stop before they enter the East River and then shoot back out into the ocean. So it is a great place to, get a lot of that last minute work done, or, we prepare some along. So.
This photo here is consolidated and it shows the City Island Yacht Basin right alongside with the long storage building. And this is May of 1951. 2 months before that building caught fire and burned, there was a great fire there. But you can actually see the marine railways that are filled with boats and the size of the boats at the docks. It's a little bit different now. Minifred doesn't have as many slips in this photo, but they're geared towards larger yachts. Now they have probably 10 times as many slips, but all for boats much smaller than you would see here.
I'm gonna turn to Alice for another question, but if there's any questions from the audience, we'll do that next.
Okay.
In addition, and yeah, do you want to do your first question?
Yeah, I'd love to
Yeah.
ask a question. Tommy, most of the boatyards are on the east side of City Island. Kretzer's was on the west side, and Dunham's, I think, and maybe a couple of others, but what, can you explain why that?
Well, the west side is much shallower.
Was it always much shallower? I know it's
Yes.
filled up with silt
But
now.
Giaccon Isbranson, who owned a number of big yachts, both cruising and racing, actually, one boat that he had, Argosy, drew quite a bit of water. So they actually dredged out a channel for the boat to go into the slip. But Giaccon had bought Good News, which was a famous Nevins built yacht from the late 30s, an S&S design. And he had quite a few alterations on it, saving it like 900 pounds and changing it from a yawl to a sloop. And it turned out to be very successful. And I know that was in the late 60s. And, by that time, yacht building in City Island, other than Minifred, was not the same as it was. So it was a big thing around here. And seeing a boat like Good News sail past the fleet on the west side was pretty exciting. But that led to Isbranson ordering the new yacht Running Tide, which was built in Europe, the hull, but it was completely finished from the hull up, the hull inside and up, rigging and the cabin and so forth, by Kretzer's. And they did a number of boats that way. Carina for Richard Nye and Sitzmark for drawing a blank on his name, very loyal customer from the AC. But they had quite a few customers that wouldn't deal with anyone else but Kretzer. So, but Dunham's was mostly power boats, so they didn't draw as much. And we have actually videos of some boats being launched there.
I know when we were talking earlier about the potential weather coming tonight, just like generally, like what makes you most excited in the boatyard, talking about like a storm, the potential, and especially like we've had a lot more super storms over the last few years. What is it like? What is the day of at or the week of when a storm's coming?
Well, it's always worse for me than the rest of the spots because we're the southernmost yard on the island.
Okay.
So Minifred gets a lot of protection from us. Jason's kind of in his own realm over there. He's nothing to do with us as far as that goes. But yeah, we take a pretty bad beating.
Yeah.
Our facility is also much older than most. And yeah, I've had a lot of nightmares where a dock breaks free and rips out a 220 volt cord and causes all types of sparking and excitement. The boats hitting each other and follows up with insurance paperwork and it's always stressful for me when it's windy.
Yeah.
When it's out of the west, it's very comforting. But south right now, we're getting
Northeast
all
is
pummeled.
particularly bad for me. I'm a direct shot, and I have Hard Island does not protect me at all for a northeast storm, so that can be pretty rough.
Although you do bring some boats over and more than over on.
We do. We try to
coast.
take some preemptive strikes. Around this time of year, after we get everybody in the water, we take a bunch of moorings and leave them good ways off Hard Island. But in the event that something were to break loose in the height of the storm, we could, have a place to bring them, or make the long trek back to the other side of the island if really need be. But I kind of like it.
Yeah.
The storm prep, the week of, it's a lot of energy, good camaraderie. I have a great, phenomenal staff, and certainly a family environment. I think the most recent employees got to be 10 years now, and the two of my employees were there 15 years before I started, and I've been there 22 years. So it's a really great environment, and storms coming, everyone just sort of pitches in. We don't really take a lot of breaks at all. Get pizzas every day and just keep kind of pushing through long days. And then when the storm does come, you feel like you just gave it, you know, your all, and from that point, you know, Mother Nature takes over, and what will be will be. So, but I understand the feeling of losing some sleep there.
Yeah. But it's not just the number of guys that you have working there, how long they've been there, it's the quality of the work that they do too.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I mean, I'm able to, you know, put certain guys in certain projects, and of course, I check in and make sure that they're doing well, but they're phenomenal, very talented men. And I learn a lot from them on a daily basis. You know, I'm doing sort of more, I think my role would be to, you know, sort of go out on the road and recruit work. And from there, you know, they kind of take over and collectively, well, one of my favorite things too, is sort of bouncing ideas off each other at coffee time and not jumping the gun and tackling something, but you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So even sometimes going home and sitting on it, or you know, sitting on the idea overnight and then coming back and collectively agreeing on something and then going from there.
But Pat is a craftsman, and
Phenomenal.
So yeah, how many people are you guys, how many people are employed? Because that's something that I always think about, how many people were employed in the great, like, jobs that we have in these yards. And so like on a day-to-day basis, how many people are at Consolidated and at Barron supporting the operation?
I think we're both pretty seasonal. So this time of year, you know, we'll pick up a few more extra hands. But I'm pretty steady at 8, I think, a year, including me.
Yeah.
We have around 13 people, including myself, on an everyday outside crew that I have working, probably 8 to 9. With some people in the office.
And like today, what was everyone doing?
Today, what was everyone doing? I had a gentleman come in with like a 60-foot cabin cruiser motor yacht, very well kept boat. He was having some issues with his generator, so we looked into that. It was actually the impeller and a little blockage in a hose. So got all clarified. On the other side, yeah, that day, yeah, in and out. On other, you know, like yesterday, we were pulling a rig out, doing a ton of rigging work, compounding, waxing, just full service stuff. I think Jason is more into like fine work. He has better carpenters and they do more fine work. We do a little more like a larger scale, running gear, large bottom jobs, epoxy, and
well, at times there have been really good carpenters.
yeah. So we actually have a carpenter working for us now that worked for Wes's father back in I think 76 or something like that is when he started there. His name was Bobby Gladden. So, yeah. So he's been around for a long time, and he's now come back to work with us. So it's nice to finally have a shipwright back, because for a long time I couldn't really take in any wooden boats to do any service on them, and it's something I've always wanted to perpetuate, and it's finally coming, you know, together. So
Well, one thing I know about the yacht yard on City Island is that they really take their clientele serious. And I know Wesley, we were out surfing during lousy weather. He would be checking all the boats, all the lines, you know, right through the night, you know. And I'm sure Jason does the same in his yard, you know, whether it's on land or in the water.
you have to live it. You don't shut the boatyard off at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
There's no way. There's no how. You just kind of gotta be there at all times.
Is there anything else you want City Islanders to know about your boatyards? Like, I feel like it's even like I'm,
Well,
you know, have been in this community for so long, and it's not until recent that I really started hanging out down there and seeing, like, I was showing you the picture of you welding something the other day, which is just, it's just so removed, I feel like, from
I
so many
think both of
islands.
us, I think Alex would agree. I mean, I would welcome folks to, you know, stop in and just out of curiosity. We're probably both super busy this time of year, but you know, just take a look, you know, get a feel for boats. Maybe somebody, it might inspire someone to get into sailing.
Yeah.
Or boating. I'm not sure that there's something in particular that I want to share with folks.
I know the general consensus is that boatyards and yacht yards make an awful lot of money. But there might be a lot of money that goes through, but it's like the beast. You have to keep feeding it. because
It's a lot of
if
overhead.
you don't, keep that money coming in, you see how quickly things can go.
And then we have really bad years too.
Yeah.
You have stellar years where even in the winter time, you feel like you have to start working Saturdays, going 6 days a week. And then there are winters where there is not a lot of work,
And I always thought in the sail-offs, we were much better off because we still had the same problems on cash flow, that we got it in increments, whereas the yacht yards are getting chunks.
Yeah, yeah, people forget they have boats come December.
What do you have, Alex?
What do I have? Well, one thing I would like people to know is that the yard that I'm working in now is in a very difficult position. The property had been sold to another company. And at this point, the two companies, the Consolidated Yachts and the US Crane Company, are in court resolving our lease, and we're just trying to secure our space to keep the boatyard going. There's nothing definite, but we keep feeding the beast, as Tommy says. We keep chugging along every day, and jobs just keep coming in, and we just keep working. So if everyone could just be supportive of Consolidated, know we're still out there working, know we're keeping the oldest boatyard in New York, chugging along. Just having that support and people just knowing about us is all I want people to know.
What a lot of people don't know about Consolidated and the Rodstrom effect there is that Wes's grandfather, who was a captain, was involved in the Robert Jacob Yard as early as 1902, overseeing a lot of work that was done back then.
Wow.
In the 1930s, he oversaw all the work that was done on boats that were built in Europe, designed by Cox and Stevens. And as such, Robert Jacob was thrilled, that he was getting all the work. And as it turns out, they were living in the house right on the corner here of Fordham Place and Fordham Street. And one Christmas, they all came home to find a tree decorated with $100 bills.
It's a good year that year.
Yeah. I don't think we have those years anymore. I think they're a little different.
Any final questions from the audience?
We have one question that's come in, and I'm guessing it's for Jason and Alex. What do you guys like most about working at Boatyards?
Well, as I mentioned before, we're outside and we're on the water, which is pretty fantastic. We're both working on, we both love boating and both sailing as well as, power boats and fishing.
And the rush of buying new boats and fixing them up.
Yeah.
You two know a little bit about that.
And projects. I might say the people. I really do. Sometimes there are some difficult situations, but I think all in all, working with folks, sort of navigate through whatever challenges there are to get them, especially with big projects. Where I have one gentleman really had his eye on an older catamaran since he was 6 years old. And recently, over the last 3 years, we've been completely restoring it. And it was a dream of his. And I'm just helping him, bring it to light.
See the dream.
Yeah,
True.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in a couple more weeks, we'll be taking it for its first sale. So,
Right.
yeah.
We've got another question that's come in. What is one of the biggest problems you face while working at a boatyard?
The whole thing, right? The whole thing is quite stressful. The largest problems that do happen. What would you say, Dave?
I would say the biggest problem I'm facing, we're gearing up to do a new seawall, which, was expected, but I would probably say, like most folks would say, that the increase in the property taxes have been pretty drastic. And, sometimes as much as 8,000 to 10,000 increase in 1 year. And, that has been, has been tough. But, I think we're getting here so far and, with more and more projects, yeah. But that is the biggest challenge, the overhead.
Awesome. All right. Are there any other questions coming in? We've got about 1 more minute, so you can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. But if not, we want to thank you all for taking the time to sit with us this evening, joining us and our amazing panelists who were here with us tonight. We do want to remind you guys that this weekend, the museum is going to be opening its doors again, Saturday, June 11th, from 1 to 4 p.m. And we're going to be open every Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 4 moving forward. Additionally, we want to let you know or remind you all of the presentation that our Vice President Barbara Delancic is going to be giving, the history of oystering in New York. This is going to be alongside Chris Pickerel, and it's going to be via Zoom on Wednesday, June 22nd at 7. And the link to register is right here, but will also be added into the chat for those interested. So thank you again, but if any other last questions, again, feel free to unmute or add into the chat.
Any final words from the panelists? I really just want to thank you all. I know I've been like hounding you to like have this conversation.
But that it was,
I really appreciate it.
and I didn't even see a picture.
I realized that halfway through.
We may have to do something to
Yeah.
get people in here next time, right? Yeah,
But thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
no, that was good.
Pretty amazing that there's so many people on there watching us.
Yeah.
I didn't think there'd be that much. I didn't even know what. We were, I thought me and Jason were just gonna be chatting over
And
here.
as I said, I think it's open for us again, but you guys are all more than welcome to, stop by and take a look. I think a lot of folks sort of, especially me back there, on Fordham Street, forget, we're kind of tucked away. So when you come
Yeah.
visit the museum, stop by and take a look in the boatyard.
That's a
We
great
can do
idea.
that.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yes, we do have just one last question. What motivates you to go to the boatyard every morning and why? That's a good question.
Well, as Jason said before, there's nothing like working on the water.
Yeah.
I've done the dusty construction site thing before and attic and all those other precarious places. And when you walk down every morning and you just smell, it might be low tide or it might be high tide. Those are two varying smells, but nonetheless equally as magical. And it's just a beautiful thing.
I know that's the way it was with Alex's grandfather, who was one of the last professional skippers around here. And Jason's father and grandfather also. And Wes and I both did it for being by the water.
Yep.
Although we'd have to check the weather and see if we were going to work today or out to the beach.